the president went out and said there was a failed attempted insurrection. That's a massive, massive thing. That's aligned to treason. And what you have then is, a few loudmouths being arrested, one or two, violent looters arrested, and a lot of the cases sort of going nowhere. And it's going to take years for even those who have been arrested to be successfully prosecuted.
Hi there, this is Solimoeng. Welcome to WorldView. This is another episode of WorldView, of course. And here at WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our perspective or our own worldview, as it were. So today we're going to have a really exciting discussion with Qaanitah Hunter. Many of you know her as a very outspoken, very successful investigative journalist in South Africa. She's very prolific in her writing, but also in commentary on what's going on in South Africa. Last year, following those really bad lootings and riots that took place in essentially KZN and Gauteng in South Africa, she was also there. She observed a lot of what happened. She even wrote a book called 8 Days in July, looking at what happened and who the key players were in that discussion, how it started, how it ended. And of course, there are still many questions that we were asking. The world was watching South Africa. The reputational ramifications of South Africa were really, really bad. And people continue to ask questions about what happened, what if it could happen again, what happens if Zuma goes to jail. So Qaanitah, welcome. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
How do we start this discussion? Okay, maybe I didn't tell people that you're also the political editor at News 24. It is important, isn't it? We have very strong investigative and independent media in South Africa, which I think we should all be proud of, because a lot of the stuff that has taken place over the years, even before Zuma came to power, came to our knowledge thanks to the work done by our investigative journalists in South Africa. I think that they are an asset we should be very, very proud of. Elsewhere in Africa, this sort of thing doesn't happen. You start speaking against power, a lot worse things happen to you than Solimoeng and ending up leaving South Africa. But anyway, and Qaanitah, let's go to July 2021 in South Africa. We know, at least we think, that Zuma, or Zuma being arrested, the imminent arrest of Zuma, which actually took place in the end, at least he handed himself over to be incarcerated, was at the root cause of this thing. But when you really take it, a broader view, when you look back at it, it seems like this thing was very well coordinated. What happened?
Yeah, so we can't talk about what happened in July, sorry, without looking at the months preceding it, right? And to say what characterized it. And this was a long time coming, in the sense that former President Jacob Zuma has consistently, flirted with the abuse or violation of the rule of law, and almost daring the court to jail him as if it would not, and having a complete disregard for the rule of law. Eventually, the law caught up with him. He was found guilty of contempt of court in a very famous judgment that was delivered by Justice C.C. Kampepe at the end of June. He was then incarcerated for 15 months, or meant to be incarcerated for 15 months. You would recall that this was in relation to his non-compliance with the Zondo Commission inquiry, so the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, investigating allegations of state capture, corruption, etc., in the years that former President Jacob Zuma was the head of state. Now, he did not comply with the commission. He did not comply with the initial court order of the Constitutional Court. They then went back to the court, and he almost dared the court to rule him, to jail him rather. this was a consistent approach of the former president, disregarding the judiciary, talking ill of the Constitutional Court, and almost daring them again to send him to prison, and then threatening civil unrest if they had to dare take that action. Right. And then we saw the judgment, and he was meant to be incarcerated, hand himself over. He did not do that. There was then a plan in place to arrest him. And that, seemingly opened the floodgates of this level of unrest that South Africa had never seen in its democratic dispensation. Now, when you talk about, your foremost question, was it orchestrated? We only saw that in the subsequent days, in the level of how things, or the magnitude to which things unfolded, and you saw patterns that in the unrest that was to come in the days after that. Now, the question is, is there a mastermind sitting in some, basement and pulling the strings? I can't give you that answer, but what I can say is that there was multiple things at play during that time. The first, when you say, was there an orchestration? Yes, there was an orchestrated plan to take advantage of the fault lines in society to create or to stir popular unrest in an effort to create instability. That was orchestrated. That was threatened months before by former President Jacob Zuma's supporters, the likes of Carl Niehaus and the grouping that identified themselves as the MKMVA. His children made similar threats, and other supporters as well. So there was this effort to hijack legitimate concerns of people, and to almost try to stir this organic uprising of sort in the name of the former president, in an effort to sort of push the judiciary, or the president, the incumbent president Cyril Ramaphosa, in a corner to say, you have all of this uprising, there has to be some sort of leniency, to flex their muscle, to create a false narrative that the country will burn if you dare touch Jacob Zuma.
But there was a whole discussion also led in part by Mswane Lemanye now, who is a spokesperson for the Jacob Zuma Foundation, on the matter of minority versus majority judgments in the Constitutional Court. I mean, what happened there?
It was completely an inconsequential debate, because the Constitutional Court always has differing, and that is the system of the Constitutional Court, in that the majority judgment lays supreme, and minority judgments are very technical in court. The court found that the former president rather, was guilty of contempt of court. They took a technical approach in saying that he could not be sent to jail, that he should rather be sort of given a warning, and there should be another push for him to, you should give him another injunction to go and appear before the Zondo Commission. So they were, on a technical interpretation of the law, in the sense that, let's take it back to the majority judgment led by Justice Sisi Kampepe said, but there is no sign that the former president is ever going to comply with the apex court. And what happens when you have a former president that just says, sorry, I'm not complying, he did not even defend himself in the court. He did not, when Chief Justice Mogoeng wrote to his legal team and asked, what do you think about this penalty that the commission is seeking? And he ignored them, and he opted to desecrate really the Constitutional Court in public. And so the reliance or the politicization of the minority versus majority judgment was a continuation of typical Jacob Zuma Stalingrad legal strategy, where you focus on the technicality when you definitely are on the wrong side of the law, and there's no way to argue out of that. What Justice Sisi Kampepe and the majority of the Constitutional Court justices had ruled was that you have to enforce the doctrine that everyone is equal before the court of law. Because if I had to be found guilty of contempt of court, if I was subpoenaed by the court to appear and I just didn't care to appear, and then I'm found guilty of there should be a sort of penalty to a normal person. So what happens now if you allow a former president to just get away with complete disregard of the Constitution and the Constitutional Court? What happens to the layman when he decides, no, I'm not going to respect a magistrate in a local area or a high court somewhere in Limpopo?
True. But, I'm trying to look at all these people who, especially from the RET forces, radical economic transformation forces. There was Colony House, but there were also internal politics of the African National Congress. There was people from the ANC Youth League in KZN who played a part. I don't know to what extent the national body, well, we never know which ANC we're talking about as a matter of fact. But let's talk about the police commissioner versus the police minister. It seems to me that that constrained relationship also didn't help in the situation.
Sorry, there was a very important thing that we set out to do when we wrote our book, right? It was 3 questions. What happened? Why did it happen? And why was it allowed to happen? That was the premise in which we walked into. And there are different strands to what happened in July, right? And the one strand is the apparent lawlessness that we saw, right? For 8 days, that persisted for 8 days. Yep. Then the other strand is the political dynamic that existed in relation to the incarceration of the former president and the politics in play. But then you had a strong focus on the security cluster, because what happened in July was an utter failure by the security cluster for them to do their work, right? The security cluster is mandated to keep citizens of this country safe in the apparent threat or against any apparent threat, whether it's internal, external, right? And we have a massive security cluster in the sense that you have the police, you have the state security agency, you have the defense force, you have crime intelligence, you have other bodies as well, right? But when you look at these 8 days of literally lawlessness that persisted, you see a very distinct failure of law enforcement, of the security cluster. What we did then is zoom in and realize that you can't say July happened because of this particular reason. There's a multitude, nuances, layers of reasons as to what contributed to this complete failure by the state apparatus, security apparatus, and at the same time, the different other strands, as well as what happening politically in terms of the ANC, what was happening in terms of organized crime, etc. Now, to your question, well, what was the dynamic or the relationship between the police commissioner and the police minister and its implication on what happened in July? The reality of it is, across the criminal justice system and the security cluster, there is instability in leadership. There is political and civil service, disruptions. There is instability in the top echelons of almost all of the security apparatus. Having a police minister at odds publicly with the police commissioner is a recipe for disaster, as we've seen. Having an incapacitated crime intelligence unit was a consequence of that, right?
And but if I can just come in then, was it a matter of politics interfering, or just the strategy or inability to agree on strategy, or was it both?
It was a perfect storm. It was politics in the sense that there's ongoing standoff between the police commissioner and the police minister, whether you want to call it personality clashes, the police minister literally begged the president to fire police commissioner Ketla Sitole at that time, right? And then there was a thing of of undermining each other and who has the authority to marshal forces. And this is obviously what is being the subject of investigation at the South African Human Rights Commission, right? So you have incapacity in police in terms of the lack of resources, the lack lack of stability in the top echelons of the police, the complete undermining, because they've conceded in parliament that they literally were outwitted by what they call the insurrectionists. They claim that people knew, in terms of deployments and that type of thing. And then you just had the general chaos that comes with having the top brass of the police, the minister and the police commissioner, at loggerheads with each other. The reality of it is that the police do not operate within a silo, right? So then what you had on top of it was the State Security Agency and their spat, so the spat between two ministers, the then Minister of State Security, Ayanda Gloglo, and then the police commissioner, the police minister, Beki Cele, about, whether intelligence was received, whether that intelligence was actionable, whose responsibility it was to action that intelligence. And so what you saw was these, finger pointing while the chaos and while the upheaval was taking place, instead of someone stepping up and nipping this violence, the unprecedented violence that we saw in the bud.
Yeah, sure. So we also live in a country where there are no consequences, at least not for everybody. You said it yourself earlier that if you and I were to commit a crime, they pounce on us the next day. But there are some people, especially the Zuma clan. I mean, Zuma's kids played a big role as instigators. They put a lot of fuel into the fire that was happening in KZN, in Gauteng, but nothing has happened to them. I mean, look, if I brought in this question, look at Duduzane Zuma, who was so much part of the Gupta Empire. He comes in and out of South Africa all the time, and we hear Shamila Batawi say, yeah, we're going to look at extraditing the Guptas, we're going to arrest them. But hello, their key business partner keeps coming in and out, flouting his wealth. Much of it can be argued to have been ill-gotten, but also he's even claiming that he wants to be the next president of South Africa. Nothing is happening to him. Nothing is happening to the Gupta kids, to Duduzane, who was sending out all those tweets encouraging people to mayhem. Why?
So this is indicative.
Do they fear the Zumas?
No. This is indicative of a serious crisis of the criminal justice system and the National Prosecuting Authority. If anything, July has proven how broken the system is. That literally there are people who were caught looting stores and burning stores down, and they were left off because we just do not have that forensic capacity. We do not have that investigative capacity. We also don't have the political will, as you've seen. The underfunding of the National Prosecuting Authority, the years and years of decay, it's just a continuation of that. It's almost as if you were a Zuma lieutenant, you know the damage that was done to the criminal justice system, the constant underfunding, the decimation of capacity, etc., etc. So that's why you saw the brazenness in which things were done. Also, you have rogue elements within the criminal justice system, which, despite years and years and years of President Ramaphosa promising reform, you've not seen a cleanup, a substantial cleanup. What you've seen over the years is people like Shamila Batoyi being appointed into senior positions, but being incapable of mopping up the institutions that they lead. And as a result, what you have is promises of a cleanup and no real action. As a result, what you have then is an emboldenedness by people who were, part of the rogue state capture years, having their tentacles in the criminal justice system, in law enforcement, and taking full advantage of it. Because if you were at the center of it, and that's what makes this particular scenario of what happened in July last year very different. Someone asked me, do you believe that it was an insurrection? And I say, do you think that there is a word? What word could you describe part of a governing party who worked for the freedom of this country, using tactics that they used to against an oppressive apartheid regime to destabilize the parts of their own government that they run? I mean, it's quite completely bizarre. Completely bizarre. This was not an opposition party versus an incumbent government. This was not a rebel group. This was literally factions within the state, factions within the governing party. And so ask, how come Duduzane Zuma or Duduzile Zuma have not been arrested? The reality of it is there absolutely no capacity within the state for that to happen. The second thing is that it's another manifestation of putting the party, the ANC interests before the interest of the rule of law in this country. And so what you then have is that people opting to arrest low-level, sort of, loudmouths, and under the guise of arresting insurrectionists. But the reality of it is that the ANC was responsible for what happened in July. Its structured movements, its leaders, its people who worked within the state in places like eThekwini and other places had a very, very big role. But more than that, what happens to the police commissioner of KwaZulu-Natal? What happens to the head of the crime intelligence, where there was actual failure? You've not seen any consequences in terms of you had a job to safeguard the people of South Africa, and there was no consequences. We literally just saw a small, tiny reshuffle of ministers, and that was all the consequences we received as the people, and 360 people died. So if you do not have an obvious kind of accountability of who should, the president went out and said there was a failed attempted insurrection. That's a massive thing. That's aligned to treason. And what you have then is, a few loudmouths being arrested, one or two, violent looters arrested, and a lot of the cases sort of going nowhere. And it's going to take years for even those who have been arrested to be successfully prosecuted. And so as a result, there is a recipe, or there's a precedent set rather, that says you can do this, you can get away with this in South Africa, because South Africa's security apparatus, law enforcement, is completely decimated.
Yeah. But I mean, you're ascribing the inability to arrest or to go after the Zuma children as a problem of capacity in the criminal justice system. But sure, this politics as well. I mean, why are they know them, they've seen the tweets by Duduzile. Why are they not at least calling them in to say, you can't do this? I don't know, charge them, because now the impression is being given that if you're Zuma, you're untouchable. It's not good for South Africa, surely.
Absolutely, but like I'm saying to you, is that the situation is so bad that there are literally people caught in the act themselves of committing crimes that just can get away with it. So there's almost a culture of impunity. And the second thing, it's a sense of like politics, like I said earlier, we can't sort of further poke the bear, and so they could get away with it, and you arresting one or two other people who were instigators on social media in an effort to kind of build this case. Like I said, it's symptomatic of the real crisis at hand in the national politics. You cannot look at the indifference to the instigation by the people that you've mentioned without realizing how it fits into the bigger picture of how broken the system actually is, and how we are at the mercy of politics, really.
I'm always fascinated by trying to play a guessing game on whether Zikalala, Premier of KZN, is on the RET side or on the Ramaphosa side, or maybe he knows which side of his bread is buttered. I mean, he was almost immediately soon after the riots began, he was begging the president to pardon Zuma. But surely he understands that there's a whole process. The president cannot just wake up one day and say, okay, I pardon you. This is not called.
Yeah, so the comments by Zikalala at the time to say, we need to just pardon Jacob Zuma, spoke, and it sort of fed into the narrative at the time that if this wouldn't have been happening had the Constitutional Court not be allowed to make that sort of judgment. And it just speaks to this level of lawlessness, the level of party before state, the level of the interest of one political party should be placed above the well-being and the stability of the state. And that, for me, just showed how broken our politics are in so so many ways. Obviously, then we saw the level of unrest, you saw the level of economic destruction. I mean, just look at it now. There's sort of 50 billion rand wiped off the economy. KZN is ailing amount of jobs that has lost, etc. And there was a sense of him now, as the premier, to sort of go out and call for an end to the unrest. You would read in our book about how he sort of came out once things had stabilized, trying to himself try to arrest a looter, which is completely bizarre. But what you saw then is the reality of the situation that you face, that there were people who, and they're leaders of this country and a province like KwaZulu-Natal, who believed that politics should come before, or political interest come before the rule of law, at least. Now, when we fall into this narrative of, is Sihle Zikalala RET, is he not RET, it feeds in to this narrative that we must be defined by what factionalism in the ruling party looks like. And it shouldn't be the case. You are the premier, you are elected by the people of KwaZulu-Natal to lead them. They should not even be this thing in the back of our minds to say, well, of course he would say something like this, he's aligned to the RET faction. No, there's no such thing. You should be aligned to the rule of law. And if you're not aligned to the rule of law, you are aligned to lawlessness. And that is how we ought to have looked at it and ought to have responded.
Yeah. But let's talk about the race factor. There have always been a level of tension between the Zulus, who are mostly Black African, and the South Africans of Indian origin in South Africa. There have always been prominent people who said some really silly things in the past. And it seems like somebody is trying, or tried at least during the 8 days in July last year, to take advantage of this and to raise the levels of tension between the two communities. What really happened there? Can we heal from that? What should happen for it to never happen again?
So we write in our book 8 Days of July how South Africa was actually the perfect tinderbox, right? It was perfectly flammable in the sense that you had mass unemployment. You still had a persisting of the apartheid of a legacy that continued in with regards to apartheid spatial planning, with regards to the distribution of land and wealth, right? Where you had it in relation to the massive inequality that persists, right? So this has been something that South Africa has been warned about over and over and over again in relation to that we are a ticking time bomb, that you're going to have the civil uprising because of these fault lines in society, right? And so there's no denying the fact that these fault lines exist, and that the apartheid spatial planning, as it were, and it still persists very predominantly in areas like KwaZulu-Natal, where you have the haves and the haves not very distinct along racial lines. And so what you then had was the people behind this unrest. They presided over the situation, right? Former President Jacob Zuma was the president for almost a decade, and so were his supporters in office. And so they sort of looked at the fault lines in society, perhaps that were perpetuated or were continued under their watch, and said, one day we're going to weaponize this for our own benefit. And that's what they tried to do. And that's why you saw a very distinct, and for me, that shows the vulgarity of what happened in July, in the sense that, we kind of knew that this was what was perpetuated under our watch as a governing party. And so what we're going to do then is we're going to light this flame, because we know it's a very flammable situation. We know that South Africa's rainbow nation is just a veneer, and that below it are these deep cracks in society: unemployment, inequality, poverty, the legacy of apartheid that's persisting 30 years almost. And so and that's why you would see that we obviously relied heavily on troves and hundreds of documents exclusively obtained by us from the security customer intelligence. And there was this admission that there was an effort to weaponize these fault lines in society, the issues around about tense race relations, in an effort to create this facade that this unrest was legitimate, that it was actually a real social unrest or civil unrest that would take a life of its own, and the country would be engulfed in flames, because it's very difficult to sort of marshal a real unrest in the name of former President Jacob Zuma. But it's easier to do that when you put communities against each other. And you saw what happened in places like Pheonix and elsewhere, where there was enough through fake news and through social media, etc. There was enough to light the tinderbox, and the flames sort of just started continuing. What you then had was communities turning on each other, and the vulgarity of all of it is that it was by people who were once given a chance, or are given a chance to resolve these issues around the persisting inequality, poverty, and unemployment in South Africa.
But do you think there should be more effort when there is peace or relative peace right now for people in the two communities to start doing things together so that they don't give another opportunity to any opportunists in the future who might try to weaponize this again? Because those tensions exist. I mean, I don't think that's all that defines the relationship between people of Indian ancestry and the Black African ones. But I think that we should, now we see there's a potential problem here. Should we not be doing more now in relative peace to make sure nobody ever gets to try and use it again?
Absolutely. And I think that the one argument that is made is that, or a point that I've persistently preached after the unrest, is that we cannot outsource the solutions to our problems to the same people who chose to weaponize our problems for their own self-interest. And so if there's a lesson that July has taught us, is that these race relations, in the inequality that persists, the sort of crazy poverty levels that persist alongside extreme wealth in this country is unsustainable. It's unsustainable for the peace of this country. And so we as ordinary South Africans have to have that conversation around, it's unsustainable for us for the status quo to remain, and for us to constantly be outsourcing the solutions to the politicians who literally proved to us in that time, and when I say politicians, I mean not only in the governing party, across the political spectrum, that they would rather benefit, they would rather exploit these tensions. You saw what happened with the Democratic Alliance after that as well. You'd rather exploit these tensions instead of working together to build this country. And so if there's a lesson for us, is that we have to work together to build the country ourselves as communities, as civil society, as ordinary citizens. And the one observation that I make in one of the latter chapters of the book, where I reflect on the days that took place and President in the aftermath, is the resilience of South Africans is something that we should not ignore. And that for me, yes, there was this really ugly resurgence of this racial tensions that was almost simmered down for a long time. At the same time, you saw stories of extreme resilience, that in spite of the state not looking after its citizens, in spite of politicians not playing their role and rather doing the opposite of igniting the civil tensions, communities came together to support each other in the form of, whether it was food at the time, where there were shortages and that kind of thing. And so while we have this discussion, I am not one of those who are completely despondent in the notion that South Africa's this tension that exists is just going to continue, and there's going to it can be better, because when communities work together, you saw the positivity that came out of it. And so I think that if July taught us anything, is that we cannot outsource our problems, solutions to our problems, to the same people who benefit from those problems or from the perpetuation of those problems for their own self-interest. And the second thing is that do not underestimate the resilience of our people. We just need to build on that now as society, to build on that resilience and say it is unsustainable for us to have these fault lines of race relations, of inequality, and we need to work together.
Yeah. we are having this conversation, and usually the kind of people who listen to these kind of conversations are not all of the people who should listen to these conversations. I mean, people still support Zuma. They still coalesce around Zuma, even supposedly intelligent people. But they know the role that this man played during state capture. They know he handed our country on a platter to the Guptas, and his kids were involved in those businesses. What must happen for South Africans to realize that we must be equal before the law, including people like Zuma, who have so many answers to give to us, to the questions that are being asked by the media, by South Africans, by the courts, that he's been running away from. What must happen for South Africans to wake up to this?
Yeah, I think that, for us, when you look at those who are supporting former President Jacob Zuma, we must not overplay it in the sense that, there's this sort of this mass movement around him. Yes, he's a popular leader in terms of where he comes from, but the reality of it is that a lot of the people that support him are the people who benefited from his time in office, number one, and now no longer benefit. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is people who would possibly suffer the same fate as him in terms of incarceration. People who have literally cases hanging over their neck. Carl Niehaus, for example, is a known fraudster, and I mean, Ace Mahushuli, for example, facing criminal charges. I could go on and on and on. So it's this, and again, for me, it's indicative of the tolerance of the governing party. It's there's still that embrace of former President Jacob Zuma, despite what he's wreaked in this country. And so we are, as South Africans, almost at the mercy of the governing party, who sort of allow this to be perpetuated in the name of politics, in the name of popular politics, and we just suffer the consequences.
Yeah, I think you're being careful. I'm not careful. We're not almost at the mercy of the governing party. We are at the mercy of the misgoverning party. That's me speaking. That's not you speaking. So you can attribute that to me. But look, Qaanitah, we can't get out of this thing. Of course, South Africans are resilient. Of course, in the end, we come together, we hold hands, we do all these beautiful things to say you can't do this to us. But these things keep happening. We don't have the kind of leader who appreciates the fragile, beautiful diversity of our nation, South Africa. And don't you think that's a problem? That we don't have a leader who's able to reach to all sides and say, guys, come on, stop it. We don't have that leader. And it's a problem.
I think it also says, yes, it's a problem. But I've been thinking lately about a general leadership problem in South Africa, beyond politics, beyond the governing party. I mean, just the weak state of the opposition hugely disturbs me. It disturbs me immensely that we have an unorganized opposition in this country. I think about who would have the authority to be kind of an authoritative voice around race relations. We're losing that generation of people. Desmond Tutu's, that generation of elders who had that moral authority, and that for me shows a huge decline. It shows it's a massive problem. We are running out of people with the moral high ground to say this can't happen, or how do we find tangible solutions? Like I said, July, and it's almost as if we've just sort of continued business as usual. A, no consequences. B, no effort to deal with the underlying problems that led to what happened around poverty, unemployment, racial inequality. There's no real tangible effort around brokering peace in suburbs and areas like Pheonix, for example, where it's controlled and effort can continue, and you can really put resources in using that as a almost like a test case of how to deal with issues like this and try to span it out around the country. Like I've said before, South Africa limps from one crisis to another crisis, and we just sort of move along. It's almost, sometimes there's the sense that we've forgotten what state capture really was. We just sort of, it's like almost more and more of the same. Now, if you look at what happened with the PPE corruption around COVID-19 procurement, almost same levels of state capture. And so what happens then? is that South Africans are just so exhausted, and for me, an exhausted electorate is extremely dangerous. You saw it in the local government elections last year, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, and more specifically in eThekwini, where voter turnout was extremely low, where people just realized that we rather tap out from politics or the political system or the democratic system because, well, we are not being represented. And for me, that is a bigger crisis than actually, the violence that we saw, because you have more and more people not playing a part in the democratic process. And so you have a bigger risk of democratic processes being undermined.
Do you think that the appetite to arrest or to jail and incarcerate Zuma is gone, given what happened? I mean, the courts could still be, this matter is not sorted yet, right? The courts have said he wasn't supposed to be released in the first place. I know that they're now playing, they are starting at games, but at some point there might be another ruling that says he is supposed to go back to jail. And now we have the ANC's elective conference coming, political will or no will play a big part in there. Is this man ever going to go to jail again, Qaanitah?
I think that it's obviously going to be laid up to the judges, because there is now this appeal that's going on in relation to the decision by former Correctional Services Commissioner Arthur Fraser to release the former president, despite recommendation by the parole board that he was not eligible for medical parole. But I think that what you see in terms of, especially for current President Cyril Ramaphosa and his executive, there's almost a buying of time, and to let the court make the decision. And so that it's not then their decision, and so they don't have to face with the political consequences of it. So it's almost kicking it for touch, kicking the can down the road, if you could continue that metaphor of let the courts decide, and at the end of the day, when the court speaks, the court speaks. And I suppose that there's going to be another test of our respect for the rule of law as a state when that has to happen. When eventually.
Yeah, sure. This is scary. Now, when you look back after having written this book with your colleagues, do you have any afterthoughts? Like, maybe we could have put this way, we could have added this. Do you look back at the product and say we did a good job?
I think we did a significantly good job, in the sense, and I'm very proud of the book that we wrote under the time frame. Firstly, we wrote it within a month, less than a month, and we did not just give you a culmination, a sort of a collage of newspaper reports or news reports. We really, in that short limited time that we had, gave you information that most people didn't know. We literally went into the belly of the criminal justice system, of the state security apparatus. We told you what NICOC, the Intelligence Coordinating Committee, were discussing during that time. We told you what was happening around the intelligence agencies at the time. If I have a regret, it's probably us not overplaying the level of information that we actually accessed, and to make people understand the depth at which we collated this information, that it was not just precursory desktop research that we did, and we really thoroughly investigated this matter in the short time that we did. And the sad part for me was that this book was meant to sort of answer those three questions that I set out in the beginning of this interview, and to be the basis for more research, for more investigation. And for me, the fact that we're not going beyond what we already know now, for me, is very worrying. It's very concerning. I would like to see more research. I would like us, for someone to pull apart the different strands and take it further, in the sense of, what is it about the race relation in South Africa that was created such a fertile ground for communities who've lived side by side each other to literally pull out guns and start killing each other in the name of nothing, really. And so for me, I would love to see more research in that regard. I think if anything, this book was a long-form investigative reportage project. It was our effort to document what happened so that it's not lost. So the gravity of what happened during this time is not lost in the politicking, in the grandstanding, and frankly in this Alzheimer's that we suffer as a country, where we literally just forget and keep moving. And so for us, it is important. And I think a very big redeeming moment for us as authors was at the start of the South African Human Rights Commission inquiry into the 8 days in July. They relied heavily on our book, and noted that it would play an important part in guiding their own investigation. And for us, that shows how, that for me, that was, it was, a boost in our egos, but also a little bit worrying in the sense that we do not have anyone within the state that has an authoritative voice that could say exactly what happened and why it did happen.
We still don't have that voice. Look, Qaanitah, you mentioned Alzheimer's, you mentioned South Africans moving from one crisis to another, which is very true. There's also the matter of the intelligence services, the SSA, CI, who surely should learn from this book. And perhaps, do you think they're now paying attention to these things, and that they would prevent them before they happen, where the same thing will happen again? Or do you think they'll just we'll see what happens when we get there, we'll cross the bridge when we get to it?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I have this, this sort of mild obsession, if you like, with the state security agency, in the sense that it's very indicative of where we are as a country, and the consequences of this hollowing out of the state, number one, under the former president. But more importantly for me is the lack of political will by the incumbent administration to fix the problems that we've seen. And so what you see is a persistence of old problems, and if not an intensification of it. If anything, there was an opportune moment for President Cyril Ramaphosa to fix the State Security Agency. He commissioned a report that pointed to say that there's these rogue elements within the State Security Agency, as widespread looting of funds. The report by Sydney Mufumadi was very, very, very telling of what happened. But I make this analogy over and over again. We are governed by people who would rather stand with the rest of us and shout, "The house is burning, the house is burning," and instead of getting hold of the arsonist, and B, actually fanning out those flames and actually extinguishing that fire. And so for me, that's a bigger problem that's endemic across the state. You see it in state-owned enterprises as well. But when you talk about the State Security Agency, I am not one of those people that believe, pointing one or two big names will fix the problem, or making, bold moves, changing the political reportage line from a minister to the presidency is going to change anything. I think the fibre of that institution is completely polluted by corruption, by maladministration and ill governance, much like so many other institutions of state in this country.
So the President Ramaphosa has since, I think it's maybe partly because of the 8 days in July, brought in the intelligence services to report into the presidency and not to a ministry, as it was the case before. I mean, it's a two-sharp, edged sword, isn't it? Do you think it's good in the short term? Do you think it's good in the long term as well, that the presidency takes responsibility for that? And if we continue, when we had Mandela, it's widely being said that when we set up our constitution in the early days, we had Nelson Mandela as the potential president of South Africa. He became president, and people thought all presidents would be like him, and we've seen what happened after Mandela left. Now the presidency is taking all these intelligence services into the presidency. He's not going to be there forever. Is it a good thing?
Okay, let's start here. The president has not explained to the public the justification, the rationale behind that decision, as this was the problem with having a minister of intelligence, and I have decided to centralize it in my office because of this. He has not explained it. We've assumed, we've come up with our own theories as to why he took the decision, but he himself has not said the reason. Where, it could be as simple as saying, I've been undermined, intelligence does not reach my desk, intelligence sits on a minister's desk, and therefore I want it to be centralized in my office. The second thing is just the chaos of the administration of that sector and that institution. They literally, now you have it in the presidency. There was no clarity about who handles answering to Parliament and signing off. I mean, does the president himself? That was a question I've asked them for months. Will the president, every time there's an appointment, every time money has to be allocated, does the president now sign this thing, right? And that's why now you saw in the last 2 weeks or so, there was this announcement that Mondli Ngugumbele, the minister in the presidency, is going to be politically responsible for that portfolio. But then you have on the other hand, you have absolutely no movement in terms of the stability of the administrative sector. You don't have a head of domestic intelligence. You don't have a permanent director general of intelligence. The head of the foreign branch of intelligence is currently facing a suspension and a disciplinary process that's going on and on and on. Robert McBride not being in his position. You have a second tier of intelligence. So, like I said, grand gestures that are empty, that we don't even know the reason why it's happening, and we don't even know whether there's any correlation between the action taken and the solutions that are required. And so for me, it doesn't even go as far as saying that having a discussion around whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, because we don't even know why it actually happened. And I mean. And as a result, then it feeds into this narrative that the president centralized intelligence into his office so that he could sort of, there's a possibility of him abusing that political power. But like I said, it's all murky, and that's the problem of the entire criminal justice system. You have an indecisive president, number one. You are then followed by this political upheaval on a ministerial level, literally in all, whether it's defense, whether it's state security agency, whether it is the police, and then you have complete instability in the top echelons of the state security apparatus, and that is a recipe of disaster, compounded by underfunding, as well as years and years and years of rogue elements.
I suspect that the average South African either doesn't care or doesn't understand the potential ramifications of this setup. Surely somebody should push the president to come up with some kind of sunset clauses, right? Because he's not going to be there forever. He might be taken out of office in come their next electoral. Who knows? The person who takes over from him might be even worse, and they might abuse these things to look into your life, your personal life, my personal life, to really, really go into people's lives. Surely we should push the president to say, I'm just doing this to clean up house for 2 years or 3 years. After 3 years, whether I'm here or not, the intelligence services must go back to where they must be.
Yeah, and that's one part of it. The other part of it is just do the reform you promised. Literally, you have the Sydney Mufamadi report. You have the president is opting not to follow through on the reforms that he himself commissioned. He commissioned these reports around the reformation of it, and that for me is a wasted opportunity. And so the whole selling point of the Ramaphosa administration was that he was going to stop the rot. He did not stop the rot. In fact, it has become more entrenched. And with decisions like this, it creates the impression that he is okay with it persisting.
Yeah. Qaanitah, this has been an awesome conversation. I know that I just want to ask you this one. Is there a question that you hoped I would ask you about your book that I didn't ask you?
You should have asked me how do you write a book or whether I recommend writing a book in a few weeks, and I would say absolutely not. But I mean, I really hope that people will read this book and understand why it was so important for us to make that sacrifice and to probe and to write this book in the way that we have, also in a way that was very accessible. And that was very important, Solly, for us to do, that to not write for people who are in the know, to write for the ordinary South African who was completely shell-shocked by what happened, was completely destabilized by the events of July, and for the attacks on their, and concerned about attacks on their family lives, and for people who could not get access to food and groceries during that time. For me, that was the most important part of writing this book, as a public service, to say what happened, why did it happen, why was it allowed to happen, and hopefully it would never happen again.
Yeah, there are still definitely too many loose ends out there. You might have to write a sequel, hopefully not on the basis of another set of riots and looting happening. But thank you so much for making the time to be with us here at WorldView. Again, to our listeners out there, this is Solly Moeng here at WorldView. As you can see, we explore everybody's perspective so that we can enrich our own worldview. Thank you again for being with us. Please don't forget to like as much as you can and to share widely the link to our interview. But also, please subscribe. Be part of our broader community that's growing, and it should be thanks to you. Thank you again. Thank you, Qaanitah, and have a nice day further.
Thank you very much.